What's up, guys? Shawn, Myszka, Movement Mastery and OptimizeMovement.com coming to you today with another quick tip. And in my opinion, today's quick tip is vital for sports performance professionals of all kinds to try and understand. This is a topic of the cutting actions that I see taking place in sport, at least the most common cutting actions that will take place in most sporting arenas and disciplines. And in my opinion, there's 4 major cutting actions that will occur. Now, this will depend on the sport and the sport demands, of course, because we can throw a couple different styles in there, as well as kind of the hybrid of these styles will make up the majority of cutting actions that we see happen in sport. Okay? Most of the time, unfortunately, in my opinion, the majority of sports performance professionals leave cutting to chance. We don't coach it nearly as much as we need to, but this can make an athlete not only inefficient from the start and not be able to perform at his or her highest level, but also much more injury prone if we don't try to optimize the biodynamic structure that's occurring with most cutting actions. Okay? There's 4 major ones, like I said. We got a crossover, which most people are awfully familiar with and seem to glamorize to a great degree. There's a power cut, there's a speed cut, and then there's a jump cut. And some of these happen, depending on the sport, more than others, of course. And some of them are going to be more optimal for utilization in some sports versus others as well. But it's important right here today to start to distinguish what one looks like, and then to make sure that we look at the distinctive factors, the deterministic factors that are going to be able to optimize that respective cutting action based on the sport that our athletes play. When we talk about the cutting actions in sport, we have to look at the kinesiological pattern that's occurring around us and how the kinetics, meaning the force development, as well as the kinematics and the kinematic structure, meaning the joints and the positions that we place ourselves in biomechanically, are going to interplay together so we get the right muscle firing at the right time to control the right action at the right moment in sport. But a lot of this, of course, is going to depend on the cognitive and perceptual demands of the environment of the sport. So this is something that needs to be taken in consideration, but is well beyond the scope of today's talk. Okay? Instead, we're just going to look at the things that make up each one of these cutting actions, those 4 respective cutting actions, the crossover, the power, the speed, and the jump cut, and try to determine what are the advantages, what are the disadvantages, and what are some things that show us that that's the cut that's actually occurring. Because once we understand the sport movement taking place, then we can determine what types of actions need to take place from there, from an action step standpoint, for that respective athlete to be able to optimize that position in the mechanics of that cutting action in his or her respective sport. The first cut that we're going to talk about is the crossover. Like I said, it's fairly glamorized in sports, among sports professionals. We often hear about this guy getting crossed over on that one or what have you. And we often just let this crossover happen by chance in sport. And sometimes the training means and methods that we utilize, often in these cutesy little drills where we put a cone here, or we have an auditory signal or a visual signal there, or whatever it might be, often utilize that crossover action. Unfortunately, most of our athletes haven't optimized the strength characteristics or ability to utilize that crossover. So that crossover can occur if an athlete is coming linearly or horizontally for that matter, and they're coming straight at it, and there's usually done in the open field when quick decisions need to take place. Unfortunately, in many testing circles, such as when we're doing an L drill, or maybe we're doing a pro agility here, or 5-10-5, we will advocate that crossover happen here, and that person will cut up and cross there. And now that crossover that will occur is often not going to be the most advantageous that needs to happen when that athlete is in the sport, but it's often just works well from a performance increase. But again, we have to remember we are what we repeatedly do. But we see sport crossovers happen more frequently if an athlete is coming at a linear plane, so right here, okay, on these train tracks, and they're going to have to stop, make a decision, and then cross over there. Okay? And anything from this direction onto this one, so I can leave this open from about a 90-degree angle here to there, so 45 degrees everywhere from my vertical or linear line of force. So from here to 45 is the only time that I would typically advocate it occur in sport. And it usually is going to happen, again, when quick on-field, in-sport decisions need to be made. Now there's a huge advantage to this, is the athlete is often the offensive player. So he or she will know where it is that he or she is going in comparison to the opponent. So the opponent is trying to break down, and that athlete is able to set up, fent and fake, and then set that person up to be able to utilize this crossover effectively. Unfortunately, for most athletes, this crossover action of having this foot planted and then rotating over usually places us in a very dangerous or compromising position where our center of gravity can get very high. Our knee angle, if it's anything less than about 15 degrees in my opinion, so from about here on this plant leg to there, and we're going to try to rotate over the top of it, can place that ACL in a very compromising position where it wants to shift over and lose tension essentially, and that slack can go right into that tendon and put us in a dangerous, compromising position. That's where we often see, at least I talk to my NFL running backs about this very topic, that if they're 5'11", 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2", they shouldn't be utilizing that crossover very frequently because we often see that lead to ACL and MCL type problems. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of ways to train for better or more efficient usage of that crossover action. So that's where the crossover is going to take place, just a little base on that. Okay? And again, we're just exploring each one of these at a very tip of the iceberg, okay? Very, very top tip. The second change of direction or plant action that we see happen in sport is going to be the power cutting nature. Okay? The power cut we see happen in sport to where the athlete can get in a lower center of gravity and a wider base of support. Okay, and then we can use sharper angles. So let's say I'm running linearly right at the camera here, and I can stop, lower my center of gravity. I don't know if you can see me completely there. So I stop here, lower my center of gravity, widen my base of support greatly, and I have a wider range of motion or degrees of freedom in my movement. So I can go anywhere essentially from here all the way to there. So I got about 180 degrees that I can turn and make a move on. Now I don't want to execute a crossover once I come here to do that. Okay? That's probably not going to be the safest way because that's going to be a hybrid between this power cut and that crossover that we just talked about. And now the more extreme angle that it gets, the more dangerous and compromising I'm going to put my knee in that position. Also, the less optimized that I'm going to be. But instead, I should come here and then look for a redirectional, reacceleration step with an open power step. So I'd come here, load, open step, and accelerate there. And that's the way we would typically see it happen in sport. I find from an advantage standpoint that this power cut is a safer version of that which has to happen in sport. Okay, safer version of a cut. It places us in a power position, and it places our primary movers in a place of stretch. So our glutes and our quads are in a position where they can explode quickly, hence the term power cut. The disadvantage is that we must have a high rate of force absorption, okay, the ability to take in greater amounts of force more rapidly, or we're going to quickly lose posture, balance, and stability. But now that power cut, if you look at it from an angle, I look like I'm in a powerful position to be able to take off and move the way that I need to and go in any direction. So there's a lot of advantages to this power cut, and it's one that I spend a lot of time with my athletes in. A hybrid between that crossover and that power cut really can be a speed cut. So the advantages that we get with a crossover of it being able to happen quick and in decisive type environments, and the power cut being in a lower, safer position for us to be able to use sharper angles, kind of marry together to form the speed cut. The speed cut typically will still utilize an open step in reacceleration, but it involves a slightly narrower base of support and a higher center of gravity. but it allows the same benefits of those two other cuts. So I often advocate that this speed cut happen frequently in sport. Now it can be fairly difficult to control because of the high rate of force absorption that's also required and the higher center of gravity here. So we're not putting those glutes and the quad nearly at as much stretch. So it's harder to control, and again, it's easy to lose posture, balance, and stability at the type of levels that we're looking at. So this would be indicative of a position that would be often executing that speed cut. So anything from about here on in, and we can look at it being a speed cut version, depending on the speed that I'm coming into that break and that plant with. Okay, I'm not going to have nearly the same level of hip flexion nor knee flexion, and again, my feet would be at a shorter or narrower base of support, and I wouldn't have the same height of the center of gravity. I would be higher instead of lower like I would be on a power cut. This would be the power cut, this would be a speed cut, and oftentimes it's harder for people to decipher between those two. Our final cut is one that many times in coaching circles and in sport performance programming, we see trying to be prescribed, but it very rarely happens in sport, and that's the jump cut, where we literally hop into our plant, okay? We can get that plant foot now, the advantage of it, we can get that plant foot really wherever we want it, okay? And we can kind of set up opponents with a feint or a fake and kind of a head bob, and then we jump and angle ourselves into exactly where we want to be in that cut. But it's really not used that often in sport, and it's very easy to get ourselves out of position. It can be done on a single leg, so on a unilateral variety, or it can be done bilaterally. So I could literally come at this angle, be setting someone up, and hop and jump and drive. Okay, so the plant, the cutting action would be this actual jump here before I try to re-accelerate it in any number of directions. Okay, so you can see where these sometimes can marry together to become hybrids of each variety kind of coupled together. Okay, and we want to try to optimize that which is going to be best for that athlete based on their respective kinesiological pattern again. The processing that needs to occur with their brain and their sensory system in the environment and still allow us to get in the best biomechanical position, okay? Remember, that jump cut can be done on one leg here to move, or it can be done where we actually literally jump to one side, pop, and then explode out, okay? A lot of different varieties there, and you can see where it can get confusing quite quickly. I just wanted to take a little bit of time today to introduce the ideas briefly, and so we can start to explore them, and so you can start to see the cutting actions that happen in sport in a little different light. But you can see where the biodynamic structure, the kinetics, the kinematics, and the kinesiological pattern kind of marry together for us to understand the best possible way to optimize position and performance, as well as then keep ourselves out of injury. So huge topic today. If you have questions, hit me up, Shawn, S-H-A-W-N, at optimizemovement.com. And for Movement Mastery, this has been another quick tip. Till next time, Movement Masters, let's go get it, and let's all continue to master the art of optimizing movement.